Hi guys, welcome to the Improvement Season podcast. Here is Steve Hall. I don't know why I've just said it like that. And over there is Pascal Floor. Say hi, Pascal.
Hey.
And I am in my new flat. You can see some boxes over my shoulder if you are watching on YouTube. And I'm glad that we've got this podcast still able to go because I've been a bit out of sorts this week, kind of being all over the place between flats, and I really love doing this podcast. I love talking to Pascal, so I'm glad to keep this going. I think
I can't blame you.
Every week, people, I think we're getting more and more kind of feedback and views, and people are enjoying it. So definitely want to keep this going. So without further ado, I will let Pascal kind of talk about his week. How that's gone. I know you kind of were deloading and getting lots of sleep.
Totally. Yeah, that's a different story. And we will cover that at another time. But yeah, so deload week. Deload week, we all know what a deload is, right? I mean, a little bit less reduced volume, intensity, and all that kind of stuff. Also, I was recovering still from that virus. I really wanted to make sure to bring down the stress. It wasn't really about the physiological stress from training stimulus, but more so the accumulated stress from the virus infection and stuff like that, right? Because I mean, stress is stress, and you need to actually take care of that in terms of your fatigue management. So nothing fancy happened in that week. It's the deload. All right, we all know that. For some, I know I just recently saw a discussion on our Facebook group that there was this one person saying that they fucking hate deloads. And I actually do disagree because I got used to loving them. Because I'm always, when it comes to doing my mesocycles, I got to a point where I have a pretty good feeling about my body, and I know how hard I can push it when all variables are kind of the same, right? When I then push it in the last week, the overreaching week leading into the deload, I know that I need that upcoming deload, and I'm always looking forward to that, and also the additional time you have, right? I mean, time is so, at least in my case, time is so limited, and I actually do enjoy when I have also some time to do other things in life, right? And also something like perhaps even sleeping in a day, which I hardly ever do. But
bro, you should be crushing it. Why is this grind mentality?
Yeah. Don't get me started on that one. So it was kind of a boring week. Nothing fancy happened. Also in terms of nutrition, no changes whatsoever. Basically, I recovered from that virus. Took it slowly, and now today I have my first training session of the new mesocycle. No real changes to my program because I mean it was the first mesocycle of my gaining phase, and changing things up only for the sake of changing things up is not my thing, and is also something I don't recommend to people doing, but I see it all the time. But for me, it stays the same so that I can actually start where I left off the last mesocycle, and that's already it. I know, it's so boring. Sorry for that, Steve. But how was your week going, especially now with you moving flats and stuff like that?
So yeah, it was actually, I don't always accumulate for like 5 weeks. I normally accumulate and then deload in my 5th week. But things have been going so well that I accumulated for another week. So this last week, I've been in my kind of overreaching week, as it were, and I'm deloading next week, which actually I think I'll end up really looking forward to as well, because it'll just give me more time to like sort stuff out in the flat. I also definitely couldn't overload for another week. I think if I was to go for another week, I would see decrements in all my performance, which is just a sign that you should have deloaded. But when I did, kind of, because I've been between flats, didn't have internet, had to go home for the dentist. So long story short, was at home all last week or this past week. And I actually slept.
At Mama's place.
Yeah, at my parents' place. And they have really crappy internet, but they had internet and food. And I slept really, really well. I actually found my sleep was better. And my training sessions were flipping off the hook. Like I haven't actually looked back and compared where, because I don't keep, we're not powerlifters. I don't keep like close eye on like when I'm hitting PRs and stuff. But if I was to compare back, I think I would have hit a number of like all-time PRs this week in terms
your
of
sumo was just like amazing last week, right?
Yeah, I mean, hitting 180 for kind of sets of, I think my first set was 10, and then I got another 3 sets of 8, and it was comfortable. And I was really happy with how that went. Bench pressing has been really strong. I have strained my left pec actually, which I don't really know how I did it. It was just like I was on my final push session on my second to last set of dips, and I just went up, and I was just like, ooh, sharp pain, and I just stopped. So I think that strain, it's already feeling better. So I think by the end of deload, I'll go into my next mesocycle a bit easy with it. I think it'll be okay. It's definitely just a strain. I was worried something could have like, don't know, like, you know, you see people's chests and they go like purple because they've like done some stupid damage.
There's this one picture, I think, from one of the Lily Bridges, father of the old senior Lily Bridge, where it's just like the entire chest leading into the arms. It's just like deep, dark purplish color, which looks insane, eh?
So yeah, nothing like that. It's just like a small strain. So I think that'd be fine. And I've got my last lower body session today. So today or tomorrow, it depends. I think I want to do it today because I want to start, like, I don't know. I'm in that kind of very bodybuilder type obsessive, like I like my weeks like being a week. I've already taken an extra rest day because we were moving yesterday, which was moving just like we're packing all half the day Friday, half the day yesterday, and then moving just after we packed was 5 hours. And I was just like, oh, this is going. We went from.
What was your steps like for that day?
16,000. And this is like, it wasn't like going for a walk though. It was just like small holding things. Yeah, it was nuts. So I reckon I'm pretty tired. But the guys moving must be absolutely overreached. They've hit their daily MRV.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that is one hell of a strenuous job to do on a daily basis. I mean, just imagine going up and down the stairs the entire day, just like grabbing heavy ass things, pack it up there. Oh. And you can't be a bodybuilder if you're doing something like that.
You can't. We're on floor 9. Now, floor 9, and the sofa wouldn't fit in the lift, so they were like, we could take it up the stairs, it'll be an extra charge, or like, this is an old crappy sofa, we don't do it. But if we were to get them to do that, like, that's 9 flights of stairs for a sofa. Oh, it would have been an absolute nightmare. So actually I didn't weigh in this last week, which people might find interesting. I've actually come to real peace with the scale, and I'm really not using it very strongly in my off season at the moment. I'm still weighing in like when I can, but I weighed in yesterday, I think, and I wasn't surprised. It was quite a heavy, like my heaviest weigh in, which it should be, at 177 pounds. So at the start of the mesocycle, I was around 175, 173. Like I wasn't really sure because going from low carb to then like, well, not low carb, but lowish, like 300 grams to then 500, almost 600 grams, like you're going to see an increase in water weight. Obviously cortisol build up through the mesocycle. So all of these things, I'm not surprised my weight's gone up that degree, but I'm not too worried because performance is so high, and I'm still plenty lean. I'm not that far over stage weight, only just over 10 pounds over stage weight still. So like 13, 14 pounds over stage weight. So it's not far at all. And then, next week's deload. So I guess that's everything at my end. Calories have been sitting around. I did kind of edge them up a little bit. So I edged them up by about 100. So around 3,600, 3,700 this week.
Did you do, nice. Oh man, these calories.
Just pounding.
Damn. And then with a at a body weight of 177 and not being as extremely active, that's quite a decent intake of macros.
Yeah, I'm not complaining.
Other people would kill for that, especially females.
I think I don't know. I don't know where it comes from, really. I don't think I have a particularly reactive metabolism, but I think it is more so to that side than not. And by reactive, I mean like when I get into a deficit, I think my body just drives things down. Whereas when I get in a surplus, like I'm just hot a lot of the time.
By the way, now that you bring it up, because of the performance increase that you were feeling well in that regard, now with a higher nutritional intake. I haven't asked you for a while, how was your libido actually? And this is something I think might be really interesting for the people to know.
So yeah, I think it's actually like it's a really I don't know how it's. I've forgotten the name for it, but like it's one of those topics that people don't like talking about. So like libido or sex life, or like you want to look good naked, right? And so all of those sort of things. But yeah, actually, the past couple of weeks it's been a bit better. And I actually had a consult with Broderick about like whether or not he might think that my fat intake was too low for kind of optimal hormonal function. And I haven't been going below kind of the recommended 0.5 times kilo and body weight. I haven't gone below that. I've been hovering around that or a bit above. But he gave me a load of ways of assessing it. And basically I came to the conclusion that I'm actually probably okay, which is good. But actually over the last couple of weeks, it has been a bit better, especially when I get some downtime. So probably during my deload is probably when I'm going to maybe notice that it's a bit raised, because I have time to actually contemplate thinking about libido, things that a libido would make you think about. So no, that's good.
Lots of time to scroll through Instagram.
Well, yeah, at the rate, yeah, most Instagram accounts do seem to be like soft porn.
Yeah. No, but now that you mentioned that, what were the indicators Broderick brought up to you?
So like he was very clear in that it's hard to actually determine some of them, because like some of them can be fatigue, bad sleep, like typical things like this. Again, low libido can just be through not having time and being fatigued.
Absolutely.
So those can come, but he was like more so like poor skin, so like spots coming up, or like dry skin, hair loss, or like just less frequent hair growth, and that's certainly not happened. My beard, I think I need deload week is the week I get my hair trimmed and I get my beard trimmed, so that's coming and I'm looking forward. I'm actually excited to get that done. So
Thinking
yeah, those
about
were
the
some
hair,
of the indicators. Yeah, your hair is so long.
Yeah, there was once again a comment on my hair on the Facebook group from Mrs. Bang. Mrs. Bang. I don't get it. I mean, I'm still looking sexy, and I mean, the people are looking for this kind of type who's the Davidoff. I don't know, Davidoff perfume. Do you know that?
The
like
sexy Frenchman.
Davidoff, a commercial type of guy, right? With coming out of the water, my long hair is then a little bit wet and jacked up body and stuff like that. This is what the girls are on, right? And this is why I'm growing my hair.
Mine's finally getting to a length. Like I've actually got a decent length fringe, so I'm looking forward to actually getting more grown. But yeah, those were the real indicators he gave. Again, blood tests would be useful. Again, you have to be careful with blood tests, because a one-off test doesn't really tell you anything for your testosterone.
Absolutely.
You have to get multiple ones, and they like to take them first thing in the morning, and I guess, but that's generally when your testosterone's highest. So you have to take that into consideration as well.
The thing is, in that regard, with the blood tests and stuff like that, I do remember the time when I consulted with Dr. Karl Nadolski about my hormone profile and stuff like that. And he was basically saying the same thing, that if you want to have a clear indicator of what's going on, you need to be hospitalized, to stay there for 1 or 2 days, where they are then measuring on a nearly hourly basis, because there are, throughout the day, your hormone levels are fluctuating so massively because of external factors, because of things that are going on, right? And just taking one kind of blood test doesn't really give you the real clue of what is going on.
I can actually remember when I was in hospital recovering from my head injury, back in that van and my head injury. I had a scar for years afterwards as well in my arm, because they would take blood tests like every couple of hours, every single day for like a few weeks, and that was just like, I actually hated blood tests so badly by the end. But I have big pains.
It's funny because I just told a friend of mine your story about being hit by a van, and I don't know where it came from, but I said you were hit by a truck. I corrected myself in that given second, but I just then realized, okay, when he wasn't hit by a truck, he definitely wouldn't be here.
Van's pretty cool though. I'm always like, yeah, I was hit by like, like those white vans. Like, yeah, a truck might have taken me out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It wasn't the Scooby-Doo van.
Oh man, if it was that would have been pretty damn.
Yeah. But anyway, we are digressing.
We are, and we have a topic that we have for you this week, and I think you're going to enjoy this topic. This topic does get beat to death, and both me and Pascal sometimes want to punch ourselves in the face when we do see a question on it, but that's partly why we're doing it, because it's going to get us loads of views. It's going to hopefully help a lot of people out, and we're going to answer a lot of the typical questions and just have a bit of a discussion about it, hopefully clear up some of the misconceptions about Minicuts. And this is something I have a particular love for, because I think it was like almost 2 years ago that I started group coaching the Minicut movement. And I ran that successfully for about a year, but I kind of fell out of love with it. We might get into that, I'm not sure. But I actually first heard of Minicuts, I think from Eric Helms and 3DMJ, because I did reach out to him and I was like, do you mind if I create a group coaching service in which I call it the Minicut movement? He was like, we didn't come up with Minicuts. We got it from Lane Norton. And it's like, Lane Norton got it from this person. And it's like, right, okay. This is just, it's like one of those old wives' tales that someone tells someone tells someone else, and everyone kind of has their own iteration of it. And I think this is partly where some of the confusion comes.
No one knows where it originated from.
Exactly. And like, it's evolved over time. And like Mike Israel has now released his bits on Minicuts. I've already released pieces before that about how I was using Minicuts. And so people are very much like, but this person says to do it like this person, this. And it's just like, there is no one set way. And that is very much what we're going to end up hopefully bringing to the table and making people realize. Obviously, I have the Minicut manual, probably put that in the comments below. And I think we do both want to really develop a powerful resource for this. I've been on loads of podcasts about Minicuts, but I think what we need to actually do is produce an ebook eventually, and that is definitely something we have, one of the ones we want to create for you guys, because I think it will just clear up so many misconceptions and answer questions just there. And so rather than having to send you to this link, this video, that video, whatever, it will all be in one place for you to just have. And actually, on that note, if you are interested in that, do comment, because it'll make it more apparent that you want this produced, and we'll put it towards the front of our priorities because we have a lot on our list. But where do you want to start, Pascal? Do you want to start by your definition of like a Minicut?
Yeah, I would like to add something first and foremost, because you brought up a really good point, which is important to also point out that there are different kind of methodologies when it comes to Minicut. It is only a term that is connected with just a short, more aggressive approach of cutting, right? How you actually create that approach or do it will look different from person to person, first and foremost, but also from when you take a look at Mike's approach, our approach, 3MJ's approach, they all look a little bit more different, right? But overall, we can all agree that it's a shorter, more aggressive cut that should be used to prolong your gaining phase. It shouldn't be a replacement for a normal cut. So when you are a little bit more overweight or you have a little bit more weight to lose, I would kind of recommend against it, because because it's so aggressive and because it's such a short kind of time, you can actually go so aggressive on it. And there are enough...
Can I butt in at that point? Only because people who have read the Minicut manual and people who have done it with me or might have heard me say, the only time I've used it in that way to I've used it as like the first cut of a prolonged cut. It's kind of like, we know when you first start dieting, you've got a long and a lot amount of fat to lose. Sure. You might be able to be a bit more aggressive. So that's the only time I've used it. It's just using the terminology slightly differently, and having an understanding of like realistic rates of weight loss and appropriate calorie deficits. That's all you need to know. It's like, people are very black and white. They're like, no, Minicuts are only used to potentiate further massing. It's like, well, yeah, but okay, I shouldn't have maybe called it a Minicut, and maybe that's something I will change going forward. I think it'll probably make it a bit easier. It's like the start, like out of the gates fast of like a dieting period is what I would say. So carry on, Pascal. That's
sure.
Clear that up.
And I mean, you brought up a good point in that instance, but I think that when you kickstart a longer cut with a more aggressive approach, it's by definition not a mini cut anymore. No. Right, it's then a prolonged cut where it's a periodized approach, where then take advantage of a higher body fat percentage, less diet fatigue, you're in a better position, you're not as food focused, and thus you can go a little bit more aggressive about it. Also to see a little bit of a kickstart and motivation as well, especially for Gen Pop people or who are on a higher body fat, they can get away with a more aggressive approach. And in the end, most of the time is actually more beneficial because they are then seeing results more quicker. They then commit more to that kind of program instead of taking it slowly. Because yes, we all preach that kind of slow cutting phase leading into a contest prep, for example, but still there you can push it hard in the beginning as well, right? There's no point in taking things too slowly, right?
No.
Absolutely. And yeah, I can definitely talk from personal experience, because the last cut or the last contest prep I started, I took it way too slowly in the beginning, where I just kind of pissed away time, where I wasn't kind of diet fatigue, I wasn't food focused. Then I already was in the cut for 12 weeks, didn't really lose that much of weight. And then it started to actually get a little bit harder and harder, right? And it was the time where I then needed to actually push harder to see an accelerated fat loss, and it was the wrong approach to go with that one, right? But yeah, so I mean, it comes down to the terminology. Once again, when we take a look at the 3DMJ, I think they recommend a time frame of around 4 to 8 weeks with refeeds in it. This is something, I mean, I'm not entirely sure about their approach, and probably they always have a different approach to every single one of their clients. Same goes probably for Mike's Hotel, but when it comes to our or mine approach, it is like basically 4 to 6 weeks. Sometimes it could even be prolonged to 8 weeks, but just in rare cases, because what I like to do, and you probably as well, Steve, is to not implement any kind of refeeds. The reason for this is that because it's such a short period of time, you shouldn't really experience the negative adaptations that normally occur on a cut. So things like diet fatigue, overly fatigued in the gym, feeling sluggish all the time, a little bit more food focused. These kind of sickness should only come in or set in like a couple of weeks later, right? And if they occur really or early, then you either have set your deficit too high in the first place, or you're coming out of a position where you probably wasn't in the best spot to actually start a mini cut in it for itself. Steve, do you want to continue and talk a little bit about how to set up? So in terms of the deficit and the rate of weight loss you're aiming for and stuff like that?
So I just want to do a quick summary of what you basically said there, is that it's like we've said it before, and I don't know where this analogy comes from, but it's perfect. It's like a bank robbery. You want to get in and out as fast as possible, get as much cash, as much fat gone as quick as possible, and then you're on your way and you want to go spend it, or I don't know, actually just the bank robbery analogy works really well, and like you said, like I don't know what it might be in that analogy, but having refeeds just prolongs kind of the time at which you're not like stealing money. It's like taking a break in the car whilst your mates are all getting the money, whereas you should just go back and forth taking money, like keep just trying to drop the fat, because you're not going to get, there's not enough time to get like massively fatigued. You just need to get in and out of that bank. And so, in terms of an actual deficit, some people, like, I never really have been a fan of like percentage deficits. There's fairly good research, like fairly advanced kind of athletes being in a 40% deficit for a number of weeks, similar to a mini cut length, and they didn't lose muscle mass. So that's nice. 40% is pretty big. But I prefer a percentage rate loss of your total body weight, because that's more appropriate to your body size. And then that kind of gives you your calorie deficit, theoretically. So if you were aiming for like, I think appropriate for a mini cut is anywhere from like 1% to like 2% and averaging maybe at 1.5% for the whole period of time. That would be pretty fast. Even at 1%, I think you'd be doing a good job. But if you are kind of maybe at the upper end of your settling point and you really want to lose a lot, and you can be quite aggressive for a short period of time, you've got all your stresses in place, you might be able to average a 1.5. And then you would basically theorize, right, what's 1.5% of my body weight? That gives me, maybe it's like 2 pounds. And then you equate 2 pounds. That's a 1,000 calorie deficit, as it were, theoretically. So you might go into an 1,000 calorie deficit and see how that goes. And what I really would add here, and I think this is what I'd probably use in the book, if we were to define it, was Martin McDonald talked about kind of dieting as aggressively as you can. And basically, actually, that was the definition. And what he wants you to then realize is as aggressively as you can means that you like can stick to. And there's lots of kind of things that you wouldn't be able to stick to. Like if you went too low calorie, you couldn't stick to it. Or if you didn't have enough protein, then your like satiation would be too low, you wouldn't stick to it. If you went too low on carbs, then you wouldn't feel good in the gym and you couldn't train, you wouldn't stick to it. If you had too low fats, again, you wouldn't feel great, you'd probably not stick to it. So that sets in loads of like limitations in terms of how low you can go. But I think that is like a nice easy way to think about it in terms of setting your calorie deficit. And I think, yeah, that's kind of the starting point, as it were, for a mini cut. I don't know if you want to go over training.
One thing I wanted to add there, I really do love that quote from Martin, because it is the perfect quote for what a mini cut actually should be like in terms of the rate of weight loss. Something that is sustainable for you and the fastest rate you can stick to, right? And if you're feeling overly sluggish, overly lethargic, if your performance is decreasing like rapidly, if I don't know, your food focus is getting significantly higher, right? This is probably too fast. Sure, there will be people who have a tremendous amount of willpower who can actually kind of crush through it. But if that's you, then still try to actually take a look at these different indicators, because your willpower can keep you probably also from actually realizing and sensing these kind of signals, right? Because I mean, there are people out there, and especially I can see with contest prep clients, who have a really good tendency to push through hard phases, right? And in their case, sometimes they can even go too low in terms of the deficit. And then they bite themselves in the foot, which isn't really beneficial. Sure, you will lose weight quickly. And yes, we have this one study, which you already mentioned, where the participants, young athletes, were set on a 40% caloric deficit, and they were actually gaining, if I'm not mistaken, I don't have it in front of me right now, they were actually gaining lean body mass still. But I mean, lean body mass isn't like equal to muscle mass, but still, I mean, people always come up with that argument of when your deficit is too aggressive, you will definitely lose muscle mass, which is, it is harder than many people think to lose muscle mass, like truly muscle tissue, right? Most of the time it's only comes down to glycogen depletion, water weight that is lost along the way, right? But true muscle loss, as long as you keep your resistance training in your daily schedule, your volume, your intensity is high, you make sure that you've got sufficient amount of protein in, then the likelihood of you losing like a significant amount or even something is quite reduced, right? And then you can actually get away with a short, especially short, aggressive cut. And if that's the case, you can always bring up that argument. Okay, you have on one hand the longer cut where it's like 12 weeks where you're in a deficit, and on the other hand you're only in a deficit for 6 weeks. Let's just say theoretically you are to lose a little bit more of muscle mass in 6 weeks than you are in 12 weeks. However, you are back into a caloric surplus or a maintenance quicker and could potentially make up for it and even exceed the muscle mass you would have at the end of a 12-week cut, right?
Yeah, I think there's a a middle ground where you aren't losing muscle mass during your mini cut, or like maybe you only potentially lose a little bit, but you gain that rapidly back, rather than edging on the side of caution, not losing as much fat as you could to secure all your muscle mass, and then like you obviously don't have to gain it back. I think if you go too aggressive and you lose significant amounts of the muscle mass, then you're basically like you're having to make up lost time. So I definitely think there is that cutoff point. So no, I think that was a good point. And then you kind of touched on training, and in very easy essence, it shouldn't look very different to what you have been doing.
Totally.
And it depends on what your program is right now and what it has been. But whenever we are going for body composition change, we are training for hypertrophy. So you want to be at relatively high-ish volumes. You want to provide a stimulus for muscle growth. You don't want to be doing like powerlifting singles and triples all the time and mini cutting, because I think that would be a horrible combination. You probably feel terrible. So you just want to make sure you're providing a hypertrophic stimulus. I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on kind of, I know Mike Israetel likes to bring down volume to like minimum effective dose to work as like a combination of, okay, so we're potentiating muscle growth physiologically through bringing down body fat levels to increase insulin sensitivity and improve partitioning ratios. So we're also going to bring down training volume a little bit so that we can bring down training fatigue. So we're a bit desensitized to training volume so we can progressively overload when we come out of this phase. Do you bring down training volume when you're going into a mini cut? What's your approach there, or thoughts on that?
Yeah, so yes, I do actually, because I think that when we take the terms of MRV and MEV, your gap or the threshold between there is narrowing, right? So you haven't the capacity of recovering quite as well. And the gap between the MEV and MRV is really closing. And what I like to do is actually reduce the volume in general a little bit more. And then let's just take an example, which is quite arbitrary. Instead of adding for one set each week an additional set, I actually don't put an additional set to it anymore, but try to progress over adding reps or adding perhaps a little bit more of weight, right? Yeah. Because I think that especially in a mini cut, it should be more specific to fat loss. Sure, I'm always saying that even though that you're in a cut, you want to approach the gym in a way as if you want to build muscle mass. And I see it with so many people, unfortunately, who think, okay, now I'm on a cut, I can't gain any muscle, so I take it a little bit more easily, right? And I want you to actually go in and still try to crush it as if you're in a surplus. However, I do think that you need to bring volume down a little bit. This is my personal anecdote from my experience with myself and also with a couple of clients, where I saw when I tried to push it too hard in terms of the volume, that they really quickly reach their MRV and then see detrimental or decreases in their performance. And this is something you want to avoid, right? I mean, you don't want to get to that point where you then are over your MOE. You can't really provide the body with that sufficient stimulus it needs to grow, or where you're able to progress the next session as well. And I rather undershoot it by a little so that you are able to push yourself a little bit more every single week, every single workout for the next 4 to 6 weeks, instead of trying to just pound yourself to the ground. Also, when we keep it in mind with the gap of the MEV and MRE, we need to think about it like that when the gap is so small, all the additional stressors lead you, of course, or have a higher impact of you and your overall recovery capabilities, right? So I just wanted to bring up a quick example of myself. When I'm going into a mini cut, most of the time I'm having a deficit of 750 to 1,000 calories per day, which is in it for itself already a big stressor for the entire system, right? And this isn't the only stressors of your life. Obviously not. I mean, we are not hermits, or hopefully you're not. You have other things in life that probably causes you to stress about once in a while as well. And especially when you're then in such an aggressive deficit, I think that other stresses in life have a bigger impact on you as well. We all know it. We all know when we are hungry, things annoy us a little bit quicker and a little bit more than when we are well fed and stuff like that. Thus, I really like to bring down all the stresses and try to minimize them as much as I can, control the things I can, and thus stay in that gap or zone of MEV to MRV and not go beyond it because I perhaps didn't take into consideration all the other stresses that have an impact on on your recovery capabilities and fatigue management as well. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I really like it. This is why I love the volume landmarks in this sense, because it really makes you actually think about your training volume rather than just thinking, oh, I need to go into the gym and do stuff and like try and progressively overload. It makes you realize, right, so when I'm in a calorie deficit, the minimum I need to do in the gym to maintain my muscle mass is actually probably a little bit higher because I haven't got that high, like I'm not in a calorie surplus, so it's not providing me just anabolism via that. Mm-hmm. So your nutritional input is less, so you actually kind of your minimum effective volume is potentially a bit higher, but your maximal recoverable volume, the most you can do in the gym, is reduced because you've got less energy. So the gap between your MEV to MRV is now massively closed, especially in a mini cut when you're so aggressive. It's similar to like the last stages of a diet or like the last stages of contest prep, where you kind of, your training volume probably doesn't look that different because after a few weeks of just doing what maybe is the minimum you need to do to just maintain your muscle, you're so fatigued you have to take a deload, and this is why maybe deload frequencies maybe are higher or you accumulate at a slower pace. So like you said, training volume is eked up very slowly throughout the mesocycle rather than maybe pushing a bit more aggressive as you're putting in more calories. That makes very good sense, and I'm very much the same, and I think it kind of solves, it's like a self-solution in that your training volume is by default has to come down because you can't do as much, and by bringing your training volume down somewhat, and this is down on average, we're not talking necessarily like week one is much down, it's just on average for that entire period of time dieting, it acts as like a desensitization to volume. So when you come out and you introduce more food, and now you're less like used to such volumes, you can start off and then build and accumulate quite well. I see some really good results actually that first mesocycle after the mini cut. It definitely is potentiated and people see really good progress then. And something you talked about I really wanted to touch on for the listeners, and I thought was very important, is the talk about stress. Because I've actually had people go through mini cuts where it might not have been an ideal time, or eventually came out to be that it was an ideal time. I had a client who basically I think they went through I think it was 6 weeks in the end we did a mini cut for, and they barely changed weight, and like he'd gone from like a similar deficit to you, like 750 to 1,000 calorie deficit, and his weight barely changed. His body composition was looking better, but his actual scale weight barely changed. And it was like weeks after we went into a surplus, then weight just started flying off, and we were like, hey, what's going on here? Well, like obviously you needed more calories to lose weight. No. What was happening is like it's just partitioning of water. So basically just all that cortisol buildup was holding on to all the excess stress, and that was leading to water retention, and that all just flooded off as he went into his hypertrophy phase. So we actually saw a really stupid like recomp in those first couple of weeks. Like scale weight plummeted, water weight plummeted, but then your muscles were filling up with glycogen. It was just like, oh yeah, this is nice. But actually stick out the mini cut the weeks prior and not push harder was hard for him, because he was like, why aren't I losing scale weight? And I think this is just this is why mini cuts, like we can write a mini cut ebook and a manual, and you're still going to get a bit confused by it because nothing is perfect black and white. And this is why we have a job, because we're coaches. I've taken through, with the mini cut movement, I think there's hundreds of people have gone through that. And then with clients, like we've had multiple clients go through mini cuts. So we've actually got so much experience with it, and we've seen almost everything under the sun. But to touch on that stress point is, if I had known he was going to go through such a stressful period of time in his life, then we probably knew it wasn't the best time to cut, because like you said, stress is stress. Like stress is going to draw away from your recovery. That's going to draw from the ability to train. That's going to draw from your ability to maintain muscle mass, or even just burn calories potentially. That's all going to make losing fat harder. I think there's definitely some people that they might want to do a mini cut, but it's just not appropriate. So I don't know if you want to touch on any of those people that you think, Pascal, just like clients who have come to you maybe who want to do a mini cut, or people you've seen and you're just like, not for you, mate.
Yeah, totally. I mean, now that you brought up all these points, I had two questions in mind, but we can definitely touch on it later. But it just reminded me on. No, I will keep it in mind. I will just quickly touch on one aspect, and this is when it comes to sleep management. If you don't have your sleep in check, don't even consider starting a mini cut. Simply because, I mean, there are lots and lots of studies out there showing the benefits of sleep. And I always joke that it's the most anabolic steroid there is, or supplement there is, that is sleep. Because even, I mean, I'm not as knowledgeable on the field of steroids, but I would assume that even when you were to take like tremendous amounts of steroids, it wouldn't have the same effect as someone who has with a deprived sleep schedule, as someone who has their sleep optimized and taking perhaps a little bit less, right? And what I then always talk about is, in that regard, we have one particular study where we saw the ratio of lean tissue loss to fat loss when you're in a deficit, and dependent on the amount of sleep you did get, right? Once again, I really don't have the study in front of me, and I can't really pick the numbers out of my head, but I think it was that this one group only had 5 hours of sleep and lost like most of or the ratio was like in favor of lean body tissue loss, and then the other group did, I think, get in 8 hours of sleep, and there was a more favorable ratio of fat loss, right? And this already shows, like, in a normal cutting stage, in a normal environment, right, that sleep is mandatory for a successful cut, or can be mandatory for a successful cut. And sleep isn't, or sleep deprivation wouldn't be the only stressor, most likely, that because when you're sleep deprived, other stresses in life are significantly increased as well, and thus it has an impact on everything. So what I would like to say to all the people also who consider going into a contest prep, and I as well talk about personal experience, try to get your sleep in check first, because you don't want to run into the risk and issues along the way, because it will only make things so much more unproductive and so much more harder. So set yourself up for a successful mini cut in really taking things into consideration that can have an impact on that. And this brings me up to one point I wanted to actually touch on when you were talking. And this is, Steve, can you give us or the listeners a brief overview of the people who shouldn't do a mini cut or shouldn't consider a mini cut, and the people who should? Because I think that there's a lot of confusion out there, and I see a lot of discussion and people getting into a mini cut or planning a mini cut who aren't really in a spot to really even consider doing it.
It's funny because you literally just put back the question I actually asked you to me. I don't know if you heard my question differently to how I intended to be phrased.
Could be.
But that's fine. And I think you made some really good points about sleep. And if people want to learn more about, I mean, Dan Pardy is a sleep expert, and he talks about it on the podcast, in that two people could have identical everything, but one person have better sleep and they're going to see better body composition change. And that's just because the body will partition things more favorably that way. And it's just, frustrating because everyone puts sleep to the back burner, whereas it's actually a really good thing. So people who probably shouldn't do mini cuts, because you have to just think about kind of, I really like analogies, and an analogy I really like for this is like, okay, a mini cut is like driving a Ferrari round a racetrack, whereas kind of just a normal cut would be like driving your Toyota or your Ford, whatever it might be, just like Ford Focus, just down the high street, or even just down a country lane or something. It's pretty easy. You don't have to worry about other cars, oncoming traffic. You haven't got kind of a time limit. You can just kind of go at your own pace. You just need to know how to drive. Whereas when you're driving a Ferrari, like, I wouldn't actually be able to go and drive a Ferrari for shit. Like, I'd have no idea. You have to be like massively focused. You have to have the skills. You have to have the background and experience in driving such a thing. You have to be like fully like not sleep deprived, fully fueled and ready to drive that Ferrari, so you can do it to your best ability. And the same thing goes to mini cutting. It's very much a different beast to doing a normal cut. If you've never done a mini cut before, then you don't know how hard the diet fatigue could be. If you're already in a fatigue state, like if you're trying to drive your Ferrari and the gas tank isn't full, like if you've got dietary fatigue, you're not going to be able to actually do the journey. And you have to have low stress, and like you have to have a period of time where you can give your all to this mini cut. You'd already spoken about it before, and I think mini cuts are best utilized by people to potentiate further massing. So if you are thinking, I could potentially need a longer cut, then maybe just start off with a more aggressive cut and then go into further cutting, rather than thinking I want to get in and out. Because I've seen people do this where they're like, right, I'm going to do a 4-week mini cut. That 4-week mini cut becomes 5, 6, 7, 8, and they start digging into a hole. And it's just like, why don't you just do 2 4-week like cuts where they would have just been so much more successful doing that. So there's definitely some prerequisites right there. Like you have to just be in a position basically of just complete and utter like de-stress, and the past experience and honed skills of be able to survive such a thing, because like they are stressful, they are difficult. And I think having that background experience is really important. And yeah, you want to be in a low diet fatigue position. I think those are the most important things. Past experience, low stress, low diet fatigue, and kind of an understanding of what to expect.
So when you're saying or talking about past experience, are you referring to that you have a knowledge about actually going through different cutting phases already?
I think at least having gone through like a semi-aggressive cut, I think is important, and having like, because when you're in just like driving a Ferrari, you have to have like precise control over the gear, precise control over how like fast you're going, and like how you're taking turns and things like this. The same goes for like, and whereas like in a normal diet, like you can have like quite loose control. You can be, doesn't matter if you're like in a 10% deficit, 20% deficit, or whatever it might be. If you overeat a little bit, it doesn't matter so much. Like things are a lot freer. Whereas when you're in a mini cut, like you have to have tight control over your sleep, tight control over like training fatigue, understand what you're doing there, like controlling your macros, making sure you're in that like good calorie deficit, so you're getting the most out of the mini cut. Otherwise it's just not going to be favorable. So I think just a good well-rounded experience of just general body composition change. If it's like, if you've never like been introduced to like macronutrients, never introduced like to proper dieting or like proper training, and you're just like, right, I'm going to go into a mini cut. It's the first, like, as your entry point. I think it's something that needs to be earned, some experience to like, so you can then use it to its best ability. Otherwise it's kind of like trying to drive that Ferrari around that racetrack and having like just a driving license and trying to drive it around, and you're just going to make mistakes and not get the most out of it. You'd be better off earning some more experience with a slower car before you then try and do the Ferrari.
No, I absolutely agree. And I mean, there is definitely something to it, because the more often you have done some kind of cutting phase, you know how much you are able to reduce your calories, for example. Most of the time, of course, I mean, maintenance is always dynamic and things change in life, but you have a slight idea. You also know how far you can push it when it's too far, and you are not digging yourself into the ground without you realizing it in the first place. And also just, it is. Cutting is a skill set to some extent as well. You have different variables. It's like you said, you are not going into a car driving a Ferrari for the first time as your first car. Most likely not. I mean, there are probably people out there who do. But most likely not. And you want to actually learn that skill, and especially learn your body throughout the process. When you're always just going into a mini cut, and this is the first thing you've done and experienced with a cutting phase, chances are that you don't really get a good understanding of what cutting is. You get a wrong idea of what a cut should be and what it should feel like. And because it's such a short time frame, you can't really make the appropriate adjustments when necessary and stuff like that. And this brings me to another question. Someone asked me just a couple of days ago who was planning out a mini cut for himself, and he asked me about whether it is okay to do adjustments along the way or not. And I would like you to actually to tell the audience how you go about it? Do you set some specific numbers and you stick for it throughout the entire period, or do you actually make some adjustments along the way?
Cool. No, I think that's a really good question, because it was something I had to consider when doing the group coaching, because it was like, right, am I getting people to check in with me, and do I need to make adjustments? And in the end, I came to the conclusion that the numbers I started off with in terms of nutrition should hold through the entire time. They shouldn't need adjusting. However, things are never black and white. Things happen, and so I would have people check in when things didn't go as according to plan. So I think going in with the idea that these are my numbers, I have to stick to these and just kind of commit to them for the entire phase, that's what you should go with. But if there are things that crop up, I don't know, maybe a social occasion comes up, or maybe you look like you're losing almost, I don't think you could probably lose too quick if you're just not losing at all, and just visually everything's indicating you're not losing. Maybe you're a bit unsure about your calorie deficit and how big it was in the first place, then things might come into place. But to be honest, I think most people who are going into a mini cut have that past experience. They know what to expect. They know what their kind of maintenance is right now. They know what sort of calorie deficit they're getting into. They're setting everything up realistic so they can stick to it. So I think once they've set that in place, I don't think there should need to be any adjustments. But I don't want to say black and white, no, you don't ever make adjustments, because I've certainly made adjustments on mini cuts before. They're just very rare. Are you the same, Pascal?
Absolutely. I mean, I got back to him and said, theoretically, why wouldn't you do any kind of adjustments when things aren't moving the way you would like to? Or I just brought up that example of you pushing it too hard. You set your deficit way too high, and if you don't make any kind of adjustments, you run yourself into the ground. Of course you want to then do any kind of adjustments along the way. And the thing is, life is always happening, and sometimes in an unplanned fashion, and things that are really unpredictable. And if there's something severe happening in your life, such as, I don't know, a family member passes away, you definitely don't want to be in a mini cut. And if you still want to be, then make the appropriate adjustments, because that's not fun if you're then in a caloric deficit, 1,000 calories deficit for a day, right? Which brings me to the next point, and I think we can then wrap it up slowly. I want to emphasize you really shouldn't consider doing a mini cut. And first and foremost, which is kind of obvious, but sometimes overlooked, are the people who have built a really bad food relationship already, and to whom it sounds really appealing to just go into a cutting phase which lasts 4 to 6 weeks. And there are many out there who are like that, simply because they think, oh, this is sexy, I'm only cutting for 4 to 6 weeks, I can endure that, right? And most of the time this is only that you are digging your own grave even deeper, right? So if you are, and this is, you need to be honest with yourself in that instance, right? It is not easy to be so brutally honest with you when you are in that zone. You have a certain goal, you perhaps don't feel really comfortable in your skin right now, and then something like a mini cut comes up in front of you and seems so appealing to you, to then realize and be honest with yourself and saying, okay, I'm actually not in the best spot in terms of food relationship. Perhaps you are still diet fatigue, because this brings me up to another group of people who are constantly in a dieting phase, rushing from one cut into the next, and never giving the body the break it needs every once in a while. 4 weeks at maintenance or 4 weeks in a surplus isn't enough to reverse the negative adaptations of a constant cutting phase. And also those kind of people shouldn't really consider going into a mini cut. And when I'm at it already, when you are coming out of a contest prep, for example, and you messed it up, it's unfortunate. I know, but accept it. Just accept it, and don't do the mistake of going into a mini cut, because this will make matters worse. You are probably not recovered in terms of mentally, and also the negative adaptations that are quite severe when you are in a contest prep, such as the food focus and such as the drive to overeat, and then going into an aggressive deficit will make things even worse. Even as you don't feel or see it in that given situation, when you want to actually desperately want to start it, right? But in the end, after 1 week, you will probably fall off the wagon, overeat, and accumulate even more fluff than you wanted to in the first place.
Yeah, it can quite easily become a yo-yo dieting sort of situation there, which is not ideal in the slightest. And it's such a really good point. I think after that, like you have to, one of the prerequisites I had to people joining the mini cut movement was like, you have to be free from any sort of dieting for at least a month. Because like going into a mini cut, like it's not something you don't cut, go mini cut. Like it's not like, that's not the way you do things. And I'd also get people being unrealistic who were like, I don't know, they might have been males at nearly 20% body fat, and they're like, oh, I'm going to get a ripped six pack by the end of this mini cut. It's like, no, it's not one of those fad diets. Like mini cuts are scientifically like based and backed, and like it's not like going to get you stupid results. Like anything that gets those sort of like crazy results, they're crazy. A mini cut is just, it's just an aggressive dieting period. And I think you brought up a great point, like for people who have those past binge eating behaviors, who just do not do well on aggressive diets, do not do this. Go through a slower cut. It might take longer, it might not be optimal on paper, but for you in practice it will be. So no, terrific points.
Yeah, and you brought up a really good point I wanted to just quickly touch on, and this is, I have the feeling that mini cuts are right now just a super sexy thing to do, and that conservative and prolonged cuts are just like, this isn't something you do anymore, which is kind of sad, because I can assure you doing something like a 12-week cut is way more convenient and probably way easier for a lot of people actually, than going through an aggressive cutting phase, which is 4 to 6 weeks long or something. And for many people, it would probably yield better results than going into a mini cut.
Yeah, it's just, it just becomes so sexy because it's so short. No one likes dieting. Those was definitely, there are some of the absolute pros of it, but there are related cons that people do not, they're kind of overseen, but they are quite important as well. So, and I know both of us, mini cuts will probably come up again, because both of us will probably be going through one in like 3 months or so, or even maybe longer than that. And there again, we'll probably bring it up, talk about how we're going to go through that, transition through that, and if this has spurred any questions. Again, if you are interested in like a kind of ebook or resource on this, then definitely comment, so that kind of gives us a kick up the arse to get that done. Otherwise, I think we've probably summed up mini cuts quite well, I hope.
Yeah. And I mean, if you have any kind of questions, once again, as you already mentioned, you can put it in the comment section below here on YouTube, or join our Facebook group, revivestronger.com, over on Facebook, and ask your mini cut questions there, because we do love the mini cut questions tremendously. So go ahead and ask them there, and we will be more than happy to answer them.
And the more questions that come in, to be honest, the more it tests us, makes us think, and then the more we can put into the book. So
absolutely, that's true. Yeah. And then perhaps we also need to reevaluate our way of thinking and reassess if that's a good approach or not such a good approach, and perhaps also, evolve with you guys.
Awesome. Right. So cool. I think that's a wrap, and we will catch you guys in another week. Thank you.
Yeah, with good internet.
Yes.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.